Welcome back to the show, everybody. Our guest this evening is an award-winning documentary filmmaker and producer who's worked with so many people, including A-list celebrities, Academy Award-winning actor Richard Dreyfuss, as an example. He was the guy in Jaws, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just making sure. I'm only 36. Give me a break. U.S. senators, presidential candidates, and more, which you can find at his website, which is jasonrink.com. Jason Rink, welcome to the show.
Hey man, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm doing really well, and I wanted to tell you really quick before we dive into it. I happened to see a post from you on Twitter earlier today, which is amazing because I thought you got banned like 17 times, where you were talking about all the brave podcasters who have had you on the show so that they can get banned too. But I'll have you know, I don't have a big enough audience where that matters, so take that.
Yeah, well, I am. I'm in a process. Well, number one, let me clarify something. I am still totally banned from Twitter. Um, I've lost 5 accounts. Three of them have been my account with my name. So I had Jason Rink, then I had real Jason Rink, then I had the Jason Rink, and my original Jason Rink, I had 3,000 or so followers. I don't know, and then the other ones, every time I'd get to 1,000, they shut it down. So I'm at like 120 right now on another one that's just banned filmmaker is my handle. But yeah, so I'm out there, and yeah, I am posting a lot of the people who've had me on. I've been on a number of different shows, including Tom Wood's show and Pete Quinones' show, and trying to think who else. Some libertarian, some of the names that are known names in the small pond of libertarian podcasting, and some of the bigger names. But now I'm on with you, brother, and I'll post that, and hopefully you don't get canceled for having me on.
It's interesting that like 1,000 is sort of the line. I'm gonna keep that in mind. Every time I reach 999, I'll start blocking people.
Yeah,
That's what I'm gonna do.
keep it below the
Uh,
radar, definitely.
Well, but before we talk a little bit more about the canceling, let's sort of go back to the beginning. So for folks in my audience who perish the thought, but maybe they are not familiar with you or your work, introduce yourself a little bit to the audience, and maybe tell them a little bit about you from the before times when Cloud World began and your every waking moment was. I wonder how long this will stay up.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess I would say the easiest way is that I I Googled Ron Paul in 2007, right? So I was non-political. I don't even know how I got it turned on to Ron Paul. I'm gonna say it probably was like the Alex Jones show back then, because I think I would listen to that. I was in Ohio every once in a while. I'd put it on, and I think I heard Ron Paul on the Alex Jones show back in 2007. And I Googled Ron Paul, started learning about him, and I was like, oh, he's running for president. What's happening here? This guy's awesome. And so, lo and behold, back then we were using Meetup, to get people gathered together in real life. And I saw that there was different meetup groups that were happening in different places. And so I was in Columbus, Ohio, and I was like, well, I wonder if there's a Ron Paul meetup here in Columbus. And I Googled meetup, Columbus, Ohio, and it said like 13 people are waiting for a Ron Paul meetup. And I was like, what does it take to start a meetup? And it was like $7 or something. And I was like, well, I have $7. So I started the Ron Paul meetup in Columbus, Ohio, and it ended up growing to over 1,000 people. It was very active. That got me into the Ron Paul movement, the libertarian movement. And I really like to say the rest is history. But after Ron Paul, I got involved in the Tea Party movement. Then I ended up coming down to Austin, Texas, and started a nonprofit and I ended up partnering with and partially funding the Nullify Now tour with Michael Bolden and the 10th Amendment Center, and kind of accidentally made my first film while I was doing that. We started filming the interviews and the events, and I ended up making a film called Nullification. I want to say it was 2011 that we finished that film up. Totally bootstrapped documentary, raised a little bit of money, and got that out there, but had the privilege of working with Tom Woods on that, and Michael Bolden and Mike Maharry. the usual suspects there. So anyway, yeah, that's sort of my tale. And I that is my early incubation of libertarian thought or Austrian economics, all of those things. I actually wrote a book on Ron Paul's life that's on Amazon, which is called Ron Paul, Father of the Tea Party. And, you can check that out too. So I've been around for a while, I guess is my point. And, that's where I've been, and that's a little bit about me. That's the early era. The later eras, and what I guess we'll talk about here in a little bit, is involved in once I waded my way into the MAGA movement in 2020. But we'll get into that.
So a quick little bit of meta question here, because myself and a small team had been working on a documentary of our own right before the onset of 2020 and COVID and all that stuff, and it's more or less went on hiatus at that point because it was it was difficult to travel to go get interviews, stuff like that. So I might pick your brain about that someday, because God knows I have no idea what I'm doing. But something that has been said to me a number of times from people who are way more prolific content creators than me. I wrote a few articles. They got a few hits, and I was thinking, man, I put a lot of effort into this, and I feel like I didn't get anything. And your friend of mine, Mike Meharry, said, "Well, it's because nobody reads." Which is funny, fresh coming from him, a guy who like makes his bones writing.
Right.
So the meta question for you is that documentary filmmaker. At what point did you decide this is the medium for me? This is the content that I can make, that I can do a good job of, that I feel like is going to reach people's hearts and minds, as opposed to the many other things that people do.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and what I would say is, and listen, I'm 47 years old, so I don't, know a lot of people don't think I'm that old, but when I was in high school, I used to make movies with my friends. We were using video cameras. I went to film school in 1992. That's what I was into in college, and that was like nonlinear computer editing was like just starting to be a thing. And so I was shooting on 16 millimeter and all of that, worked on some independent films in the 90s, and then never really got into the industry though. I didn't want to go out to LA, all of that. So I had this deep passion and desire for making films and using visual medium because of all of that. Well, I guess I would just say it took me getting into the Ron Paul movement and me sort of then seeing like, oh, here's a series of topics that really pique my interest, and wouldn't it be cool to make movies? And so for me, it was that. And I would say the other thing is that I do also like to speak. I've spoken a lot. I used to be a pastor, so I've spoken from stage hundreds of times, and I like podcasting. I like sort of riffing. And so my most natural medium is one where I can just kind of get up and just talk to people like off the cuff. But the problem with that is I also really don't like to be wrong or misspeak, And so the truth is that edited video medium helps me to be more precise and accurate about what I might want to say, what I want to do, how I might want to craft storytelling or, put something together. And so that's where for me it really comes together. I have writing is such a chore for me. I just can't even bring myself to do it. And so yet I have to express myself. So that's how it's been. And I did spend a season of time. After I made the Nullification movie, I went and worked at a company called Emergent Order with John Popola, who is the genius behind the Keynes versus Hayek rap videos, among other things. And John mentored me in writing, directing, and producing. And so when I had that opportunity to learn how to make content at a very high level, that's when I really feel like I found my calling, because I was like, no, I really want to do things that if at all possible, given the resources I have and the time and the talent, to create stuff that competes at the highest level of content, but also is going to move the needle on some particular issue or something that I'm interested in talking about.
Well, that's you brought up some interesting points there in terms of just content creation in general. One of my biggest, I don't know if I'd call it a pet peeve, but something I'm aware of is there's a certain class of people that always try to rush out their hot take whenever something just happened. Whereas I feel like obviously with something more like a documentary that you're producing, it's a little bit more of a big picture. Let's deep dive. Let's reflect a little bit on what happened. And the problem with the hot take is that if you get your hot take out on a Wednesday and Thursday the story changes, now what you said on Wednesday makes you look like an idiot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely, I totally get that. So let's skip forward a little bit. What was the last time you remember working on a project where whether or not it was going to be banned, deplatformed, if it was seriously going to change sort of your marketing strategy, that those things weren't a concern? What was the last time that you didn't sweat that?
Yeah. So, the thing is that I actually spent, once I left Emergent Order in 2015, I went and immediately started working on with a PAC that was trying to get Rand Paul elected in the primary, right? So in 2015, 2016, Rand was, a primary candidate against Trump. And obviously he didn't make it, but I did some direct political ad content creation. I had a whole team. We put out dozens or 100 pieces of content that were targeted in different areas. And the thing is after that, I actually stopped making content that was really political per se, for like several years, because I was just trying to build my business, right? I was trying to build a commercial production company with clients that pay money, so that I could build that and scale that as like a cash flowing asset, basically. Like I recognize that if I want to fund my passion projects, the best way for me to do it is to build a profitable business and then do this other stuff with the money I make from that. And so that's what I set out to do for like 4 years. And so I got to the place where I had some employees, I had a bunch of equipment, and I had freed up my time a little bit more, that I wasn't doing the daily grind of shooting and editing and things like that. And so I really spent a number of years where I was just making regular content. I wasn't doing anything that I thought was going to get me canceled or banned. And in fact, when I decided to start making a film on the 2020 election, which is really, that's kind of what happened, was I saw when the election went down, and I saw immediately that there was this protest movement starting up around it. It reminded me kind of the Tea Party, but like more anti-establishment. I saw that there was something about what was happening around Trump that was a little bit more inoculated against rhinos. Like they're just, that a lot of that stuff was there, and I was like, huh, this is going to be interesting to see what happens here. And so I literally just reached out to Ali Alexander on Twitter, and I got him to agree to let us meet him out in Georgia, and me and a co-director of mine went out to Georgia and started shooting like I don't know, it was like a week and a half after the election. And what happened is I just decided to go document the MAGA election protest movement. And I wasn't sure how long we were going to do it. We ended up doing it for 10 weeks, roughly. It ended up leading me to being in DC on January 6th. January 6th happens. I end up sort of, getting it, almost another entire movie developed out of that. I mean, and really just was kind of like swept away and trying to document this whole thing that was unfolding. And so it wasn't actually until after January 6th, that I got hit with my first, ban. And so, I was making this content and documenting this stuff without any thought that it was going to cause a problem for me. Now, I recognize that being involved in like MAGA and the election protest movement as a documentarian, or even posting things that might be favorable about it, could get me to be like persona non grata, right? And it like could be a problem if I want to go out and get a job at a corporation or something. Like I recognize that stuff could potentially be a problem, but because I work for myself, I have my own business, and all my clients are like, they're not going to leave. They don't care. I had a lot of freedom, I felt like, to go out and just pursue something and be like, I'm not even worried about what might happen. But what I didn't anticipate was that I was going to get banned from Twitter and Facebook, and then eventually Vimeo. I've lost YouTube channels. I didn't I didn't expect that was going to happen when we started posting trailers for the film that we were in production on.
Well, get ready for a moment of silence because I'm going to ask you about the post January 6th world here momentarily. But I got one more for you before we get to the day that lives in infamy.
All right.
Now, you talked a little bit about not maybe perhaps being cognizantly aware of the culture, but not thinking too much about how, well, I don't think this is going to shut my business down because I associate it with this person or that person. But that's a really interesting question, I think, for a lot of people out there, because there's definitely sort of this feeling in our community in particular, where there's sort of two camps to it. There's one camp that says, I'm just going to do the best I can and try to live my best life, and I'm not going to judge myself or others based on what kind of stands they do or don't take, because I get it. Like you can't get fired because you said the wrong thing. On the other hand, there's people that say, but if we don't put our money where our mouth is, then what are we doing? We're not really accomplishing anything. We're just hiding from the Gestapo. So with that sort of framework in mind, um, how do you make the balance between wanting to cover the things that you genuinely are interested in? It's not that you yourself are a crazy domestic terrorist. It's just that these are happenings. This is history being written before our eyes. I want to document it. Versus what's too hot to handle for your career.
Yeah, well, so I've burned all the boats at this point, because I'm actually embroiled in a bit of a controversy right now that I'm not ready to talk about publicly, but I'll likely be talking about this very soon, about a short film that I have out there on Nick Fuentes. And depending on how some things go over the next 24 to 48 hours, this what I will end up sharing about this story is going to probably shock some people when it comes to the level of cancellation that is starting to even happen in places that you might not expect it. So let me just leave it at that. But what essentially, this has been a radicalizing effect on me, frankly, because what the first thing that really happened was when we were out covering the Stop the Steal movement, we ended up interviewing this guy in December of 2020. After the election, he was out on the road, just some guy that was interesting. We saw him in DC, we saw him in Phoenix. We decided to sit down and interview him. Well, when January 6th rolls around, and we didn't think much of this guy. We were like, we may not see this guy again. Well, when January 6th rolls around, an image hits the internet, and me and my co-director realize, oh, that's Jake. That's the guy we interviewed in December. And it was the Q shaman dude. And he was standing in the middle of the Senate. And so we're in DC, January 6th. This guy that we know and we have a cell phone number, becomes the face of the day. And we're like, oh my God. So we reached out to him to see if he would interview with us the next day, and he agreed to it. So we ended up sitting down for over an hour with the Q shaman, and he told us the entire story. And then he was arrested 2 days later and has been in jail ever since. So we ended up getting the exclusive only telling of the tale that will ever be done in that moment. And we decided to build a documentary around it. And when that moment happened, we realized we had something significant. And I was like, this is relevant. Like a story about this guy, this is going to meet the Netflix scroll, And so we went out and interviewed his family, his lawyer. We started getting all this footage. We decided to cut a trailer together about the film because we wanted to make people aware of it. And we posted it January 12th, I think. And it got 7, 8, 9,000 views in just a few hours on YouTube. I posted it to Twitter and Facebook, and within 12 hours, I was permanently banned from Twitter and Facebook. No recourse, no reconsideration, just gone because of a trailer about the Q shaman. So it wasn't like pro Trump. It wasn't like, hey, the election was stolen or anything like that. It was literally kind of a funny, interesting trailer about this really interesting, weird, like guy who everybody knew and recognized. And, you know, what I began to recognize was that, and we got in conversations with different, the film has been pitched up and down the chain to the Netflix, Amazons, A&Es, Hulus. Executives have seen that have been pitched this film, and nobody's interested in it unless he's the Osama bin Laden of January 6th. And so, like, I recognize, the political narrative is what's at stake here. This is what the problem is. This is why I was canceled. I was like, it doesn't make any sense. They said we were inciting violence or whatever. And so, but that's just not true. And so to this day, I still don't have those accounts back. And, but the same is true with the other film we're doing, because we have a whole film we want to release called The Steal, which is just about the movement, the grassroots movement that rose up around it. And I'm like, well, I have no home for that either. Like, there's no one's going to take that film. I'm going to have to release that independently. And then, and in the process of this, I was still having other things that were happening to me. Eventually, I lost my entire Vimeo account, which had 4,000 videos on it. I used it for business. And the reason I lost it was because I uploaded the rough cut of a short film that we're working on about the America First host, Nick Fuentes, who is very, very, very controversial. And that film is about how the federal government seized $500,000 of his money, put him on a no-fly list, and has not charged him with a crime. And he's also been deplatformed from like 40 different services. And I saw this story and I'm like, wow, this is an incredible story. It doesn't matter if you like Nick. It doesn't matter if you hate his ideas or you think he's a terrible person. Like, due process and the federal government doing that to anybody is totally absurd. And it should outrage any of us. But then that film also has created all of this other heat for me, because there are people inside the libertarian movement who are like, don't want anything to do with this. People have asked me, why would I make a film on somebody so quote unquote toxic? And I'm like, listen, this is these are the stories that need to be told. Like, these are the canary in the coal mine stories. These are the narratives that have to be undermined because the federal government and big tech and corporate media are using these narratives to move things in a particular direction in our society. And so over this whole period of time, I've just been slowly like burning the boats. And I've been sort of like, okay, well, there's no going back. And I'm going to ultimately like have to make a decision on whether or not I want to work with the Toyotas and the Aston Martins of the world, which I used to do, and whether or not I want to just cater my business and what I do professionally to work with people that are not going to cancel me, and then try to find ways to do an end run around the current media environment in order to get my work out into the world. And I'm going to tell you, it is a massive challenge. Not everybody can do this. And people who are scared of speaking out because they have a lot to lose, I don't blame those people. Like, I think you've got to be, really, really wise about the decisions you make in there. And you have to try to do things to make yourself cancel proof in your job, geography, relationships, like money, all of this stuff. You've got to do everything you can to try to create a situation where you can't be canceled. And so that's actually what I'm attempting to do now, is I'm attempting to step forward and just be like, fine, I'm just going to be the most canceled filmmaker in America. I'm going to just make the most provocative content that still supports and puts out the ideas of radical freedom and liberty, as far as I'm concerned. And, cancellation be damned, I guess.
Well, I do agree with you on that. I try not to be judgmental of people that are having to pick their battles because they've got lives to live and families to feed and that sort of thing. Because I'm always reminded it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? Um, but a couple of things I want you to kind of expound upon because there's a lot to unpack in there, and we don't. I mean, we could do this 7 days a week and not touch it all. Uh, is sort of the concept of being radicalized, that you maybe approach some of these topics thinking, well, I'm just going to cover it because that's what I do. I think it's an interesting story more than I necessarily have an agenda. And yet, because of the backlash that you've received, that then steers you in a direction of, oh, obviously I hit a nerve, right? And the other thing that you sort of already talked about a little bit being how troubling is it for other people like yourself, for people in the content sphere, for other documentary makers, or just journalists or independent media, whatever you want to say? How troubling is it to try to be an objective viewer and cover things with as little slant as possible, yet that's still not enough, isn't it? There's no amount of even kill you can be that's going to save you from the banhammer if it finds you because you talked about the wrong thing. It's not even what you said. You even broached the wrong subject.
Yeah, and I mean, look, the I guess I'm getting to the point where I'm sort of like, no, I'm actually a propagandist, you know, because when I look at the different documentaries that HBO or whoever else has done on January 6th, I'm like, yeah, though that's pure propaganda. Like that's exactly what it is. Dude, I was there. And so like I look at what's greenlit and I'm like, yeah, it is supporting the existing narrative. And so when originally what I want to do is I want to be, fair and balanced or whatever. Um, what it does over here is I'm like, wait a minute. There's already people out there creating the narrative supporting content. I want to be counter narrative. Like if that adheres to truth, if that adheres to the facts. And so I'm not talking about being a propagandist in a way that it's like, oh, I'm trying to not be truthful. No, that's the funny thing is I'm like, wow. So if I tell a story in this way that occurs to me as truthful and accurate, and I'm going to be shut down for it, what I can do is I can complain and be like, oh, the hypocrisy or whatever. Or I could just be like, okay, fine. I'm just unapologetically going to seek out the most provocative stories and tell the ones that I want to tell from the perspective that I want to tell it, which is one that will bring a magnifying glass to things that are anti-freedom, anti-libertarian, anti-liberty, um, and like, and I have an agenda, which is like to show, hey, on January 6th, the government has weaponized the DOJ and has kept people in solitary confinement for 300 days, and that's not right. And it's like, and these people aren't violent and whatever. So it's like the funny thing is that all I wanted to do was just make movies, and now because I've gotten slammed so hard, I lost $100,000 a year in revenue because I was running digital marketing for clients. I cannot run ads on the Facebook ad network, period. I'm totally banned. It's like I've invested my own capital in these projects, and it's like they may never see the light of day or turn a dollar a profit. And it's like, that has a way of radicalizing you a little bit, where it's like, and the other thing is that I'll just say the other thing that has happened is that, the Joe Rogans of the world and the Tim Pools of the world and certain people who've achieved a certain level of status as a content creator, many of these people are kind of cancel proof now, but it's because they had all of this opportunity to build their following and be their provocative selves out there in the world. That is gone almost entirely now. And so it's like, what's happened is it's like cut off the bottom rungs of the ladder of establishing yourself as a content creator out in the world, because you can't even get to 1,000 followers. You can't even talk about certain ideas that you used to be able to get in under the radar. Now you can't. And so what I fear is that there's not going to be this other new crop of anti-establishment, counterculture content creators that can rise up and become the next Tim Pool or the Joe Rogans of the world, because the platforms cut you off at the knees. And so that's what I've experienced. Fortunately, Tucker Carlson had me on his show back in November of last year, and that really put our project on the map. But it's like, without that, most people wouldn't even know what is going on with me.
Well, Jason, we're starting to run short on time, and there's a million other things that I wanted to talk to you about. So I think you're just going to have to come back if you're not just totally appalled by your appearance here. I wanted to talk a little bit about chain of custody and election fraud and a million other things. So I think what we're going to do
Oh
is we're
man,
going
I'll
to
come
do.
back. Tom Woods
Okay.
had me on for 2 episodes. I'll do a second part with you, man. I'd love to.
All right. Well, there you
Let's
go.
make that happen.
All right. Well, we'll wrap up with a really quick lightning round. Since you're a guy who's
I'll
been
keep
at
the
the
answers
scene.
short. I'll keep them short.
Okay. You've been at the scene, you've been at some of these huge events, you've documented them. So I'm going to ask you a handful of questions just to see how much you don't care about being canceled. Or don't care about me being canceled, I guess, is what the real question is. Number one, do you think that more years than not enjoy election fraud of some kind?
Yeah. So what I would say is that I think that there's been election integrity problems in our system for a very, very long time. And I would say that 2020 was specifically egregious, and that I think that the establishment has trotted out the line, the safest, most secure elections in history, as like an overcorrection. They're like protesting too much, right? And so I do think that 2020 was particularly egregious for a number of reasons. But I do think that election integrity has been an issue for decades in this country.
All right. Question number two, since you sort of already touched on it. Do you believe that the 2020 election cycle was such a level of election fraud that it did genuinely sway the outcome?
So I'll keep this short. The answer for me is yes. And you touched on this a moment ago. What most people don't realize is that there was almost no chain of custody in the ballot drop boxes in many states. There was no surveillance in many states, and that in many states, the rules were changed in unconstitutional manners according to their state constitutions, which would necessarily make many of those votes cast illegal by constitutional, from a constitutional perspective. So, yes, I do believe that. I do believe the outcome likely would have changed, or would have changed. I do believe the outcome would have changed.
Two more. Well, technically three, because we have a viewer mail question. Next one. Do you believe that the whole era of the COVID pandemic age that we've lived in was largely used as a cover to exponentially increase the power of big tech and the deep state?
Yeah, so I believe that essentially three things came out of that. Number one, I believe that it was a managed decline of the economy to take out the last leg of what Trump was able to run on. Number two, I think it helped to usher in the big tech, censorship arm. And number three, I think it was to create cover in the case that they needed to fortify the election.
All right. Next to last one. If you had a guarantee right now that the next documentary you produce would be seen by everyone, it would not be in any way canceled on any platform, and you had an infinite budget, what would be the topic of that documentary?
Man, I think I would probably do it on national divorce. It would almost be like the sequel to Nullification. I think there's a really
Ooh.
really powerful film that I would make that would leverage the sentiment on the left to try to get them to understand that balkanization in the United States would lead to the most peaceful outcomes for us.
Gosh, I got to steal that idea. That's a great one. Good answer. All right, last question for you, Jason, before we wrap up. Michael Bolden asks, Dear Jason, what is Teen Wolf's favorite food?
Oh my gosh, Michael, you put me on the spot here. I do not know what Teen Wolf's favorite food is, but I do know that Teen Wolf's favorite activity is to wolf out. That's my
All
final
right.
answer.
I just want you to know, because I know nobody else gets it. I just want you to know that Michael Bolton demanded I ask you that question, but he didn't even deign to explain the insider baseball for me to understand the question. And I don't think I want you to either. I think we'll just let it
We have
ride.
to leave that as a pure mystery. It's a mystery. It's a secret between me and Michael, frankly, and very few others on the inside. But I love that guy, and I appreciate you having me on, brother. This has been a long time coming, and I hope we do it again soon.
We definitely will. Jason, where can people go to support you and your content? Since we're running out of places
Yeah,
where they
yeah.
can go.
Yeah, you can check out my podcast that I haven't put any episodes out for a while at cancelproof.tv. You can also go to qsentmemovie.com to check out the major film project that we're wrapping up this year about the Q Shaman in January 6th.
All right, that sounds great. Jason Rink, thank you so much for being on the show, buddy. I really appreciate it. We will have you back. Hopefully it won't take us years to make that happen, but we will have you back.
Right on, brother. Thanks.